Hello there and welcome to another paint along style episode. So the colors you need to paint along with me are titanium white, burnt umber, alizarin permanent, cadmium red, yellow ochre, sap green, ultramarine blue, and ivory black. And I'm just working on a regular old cotton canvas that has been pre-toned with mineral spirits and burnt umber oil paint about 20 minutes before the start of the painting. So the photo reference in the top left corner of your screen has been taken from a copyright-free picture resource called Pexels, or Pixels, I don't know how they pronounce it, but I'll have a link to that information in the description box down below. So I'm going to start off with a simple umber sketch, and for those of you that are following along at home, you can also follow along with just a regular pencil drawing, graphite drawing, crayons, acrylic paint, whatever you'd like to use. Now I'm looking for just the placement of the head first. The surface is kind of slick because I did tone it with the burnt umber and mineral spirits 20 minutes ago. I may have used a little bit too much mineral spirits, so it shouldn't really be runny like that, but it's okay. The idea is after 20 minutes or so, the mineral spirits will dissipate into the air, but the time it takes for the mineral spirits to dissipate is what kind of helps with the drawing process, because you want to be able to move these lines quite freely. So the perspective is something to take note. So the model's head is turned. I think this is the first, or maybe one of the first painting demonstrations I've done with a tilt like this. And remember, this type of paint along does not yield a realistic style painting. It is a little bit longer since I'll be filming this in real time. The purpose of this is to provide you with something that you can watch, draw, or paint along to. Now, the situation has been pretty difficult for all of us with what's going on, and I really hope that everyone at home is being safe. I hope that everyone is safe. Certain restrictions on my filming space that I can't really talk about are being kind of affected by what's going on. So if you hear any noises around or unexpected cuts or edits, you'll know why. And again, I don't have my own studio, so if you hear noises, again, just do the best that you can to ignore them. So this is just the corner of the eye socket on one side and on the other side. That's going to give me an idea of the placement. A little mark for the eyes. Mark for the nose, mark for the mouth. Now clearly I have the placement a little too exaggerated, so I'll erase with just a regular old bristle brush. The important thing is the placement of everything. You'll have to excuse me for a second here. Alright, so excuse that momentary delay. As I was saying, my filming space is not really my own. There is some hostility in my space, in my area, so it does make filming a little bit more complicated than it needs to be. if for some reason I end up having to miss uploads during this stay-at-home quarantine time period, you'll know why. And just keep up to date on the community section on my YouTube channel. I'll let you know there a day before, or at least a couple hours before I end up having to miss an upload. Just know I'm doing the best I can with this situation. So clearly the hair needs to go back a little bit more. And as long as I can get this shape relatively close, just this silhouette, I should be able to continue to work. And I know I haven't been able to post on the Facebook photo reference group. So those of you that have been following me on the Facebook group, I do apologize for that. I'm trying to do the best I can with this situation. It's kind of been a little challenging, to say the very least. Now, as I usually say in the paint-alongs, I'll try my best to show every single brush stroke. I'll try to do that with this. And I'll also make sure to not to speak so much and not to ramble so much as I am now. So I'm just going to remain quiet. So here's the placement for the nose. That looks a little bit better. Again, just using a straight line and comparing this point to this point. The mouth, I more or less don't care. I'm just trying to kind of guesstimate where things need to fit. But the main triangle is the most important thing right now. The main triangle being 1, 2, 3, connect 3 dots. You have a triangle. Trying to make that as accurate as possible. Now, I don't expect to get a perfect result with these outlines. So if you're drawing or painting along with me at home, you can spend much longer, and I recommend you spend much longer in this stage. Try to get the shapes as accurate as possible. But as this is a paint along, I do need to move a little bit faster. So that's why I say that it's not intended to create the most realistic results, but rather something you can paint along with at home, or just keep the video on at home. And I'll be your studio friend. And I'm just using a microfiber cloth to subtract a little bit. So I'm subtracting as much as I can before the color settles in too much. See, I don't I hardly have anything for the mouth or the nose. Just a little mark here and there to indicate where things are eventually going to fit. That's all I need for now. So you'll see how I put information in. I step back. Well, you can't really see me step back, but I'm sitting back and then assessing whether these shapes make any sense or not. It's getting a little closer. Okay, so I'll just correct the rest of the outside shape with the background color. So I'm going to utilize the burnt umber that's already on the drawing brush. So burnt umber and alizarin permanent. Now we're going to make that transition into color. So we're going to be working shape, value, color, proportion, perspective all at once, which will allow us to move much faster. But again, it doesn't yield the most realistic result. Consider this a fun learning exercise. So if you're painting along with me at home, remember it's just burnt umber and alizarin permanent. Trying to keep the shapes rather kind of like blocky. It's easier to construct with straight lines than it is to construct with curves, so that's why I don't really have too many curves just yet. Let's add a little bit of the cadmium red now, just to add a little more heat into the background. Alright, so now that we have the background relatively covered, we're just going to switch into the ivory black, burnt umber, alizarin. Now we're going to fill in the darkest areas. See how we're starting with the darkest values. Also addressing shapes a little bit there. Now we're going to add the yellow ochre, kind of mix both of these colors together. And we're going to put this in for the shadow. We're building this from the inside out, so I'm using the color itself to help me draw the shadow shape. So if you're following along with me at home, just 1, 2, 3, 4. That's all I need for this area behind the ear. Let's use this to draw the contour for the side of the mouth a little bit. the muzzle of the mouth, and over here. A little more yellow ochre. A little bit of the red. I want to start off with big, simple, flat shapes. Now the next thing you're going to want to do is control the range a little bit. So with the other brush that I was using to kind of just push the shapes around, I'm going to go into the titanium white, yellow ochre, but more titanium white. So now we're going to control the range. So I'm going to put in a very bright light. You see the very bright light? And now we're going to kind of work in between all of these shapes. So with this area being the darkest, this area being the lightest. Now last week I introduced a different type of titanium white. I introduced fast drying titanium white. For Alla Prima, for this type of painting, I would not recommend using the fast drying. So I'm using just a regular titanium white. So now we're just going to control the value range. And at the same time, you're seeing we're starting to put in some more value gradations. So now I have a color value web mixed up here automatically. And I'm going to keep that color value web so that I can refer all of the values to one another as I put them down. Now ideally, I would prefer to take my own photo references. There's nothing wrong with the photographs in the Pixels or Pexels site where this is coming from. But the thing is, it's kind of hard to find images that don't have too much editing. So I tried to find images with the least amount of editing. You can tell there's quite a bit of makeup in this photograph, so just be aware of the planes and be aware of the influence that the makeup has on the structure of the face. So the makeup is making this area around the eye socket a little bit darker than it would be without the makeup, and I'm aware of that. And you can paint those effects from the makeup. It's perfectly fine. Just be aware of them as you do them, as you paint them in. A little bit of a dark plane underneath there, and we're going to build the structure of the chin before we put in the structure for the mouth. So we're working all of these structures as if it were clay, if we were sculpting out the head out of clay. Another little side plane there. A little bit more yellow, cadmium red. These lights down here. So this is the stage where we can start to talk about the awkward stage So when you're painting in alla prima, that is wet on wet, when you finally start to cover the lights, that's when the awkward stage is going to be at its worst. Simply put, the awkward stage is natural. It's what makes portrait painting a little bit more difficult. And that is because we're not used to seeing unfinished faces. But if you see an unfinished still life, an unfinished teapot or something, you know, it doesn't really bother the eye as much as when we see an unfinished human image. So the awkward stage is just something you learn to work around. It's no problem. Just take some getting used to. So see how I'm sculpting just like if it was clay. It's one chop here, 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 and then there. Now, you know what I'm going to do to save us a little bit of time? Off camera, I'm going to make all of these little chops kind of sink into one another. So kind of blending in these planes into one another. I won't be adding any extra information. I'm just going to be making this a little bit more smooth. So let's do that right about now. And now you see that most of the planes of the face have now been blended into one another. So what I did was, as you're seeing, the color value web is a little bit more complex now. So I just took this light, brought it a step down for that value, step up, but not as bright as this, step down, step up here, and then basically just kind of flattened out the rest of this. Again, I don't really want to render anything in this stage. I just want it to be kind of like John Singer Sargent would say, kind of like a wig maker's mannequin. So now just putting in a little bit of the light that is seen underneath of the neck here. I don't quite have the turn of the neck, but that doesn't really bother me as much. I'll put the angle for the neck over here and just leave this be. We'll be spending much more time up here. So now that we have those big shapes in place, again, for those of you following along with me at home, again, all I did was kind of just blend all of these shapes into one another, which is something that would have taken at least a good 30 minutes of filming time. So I decided to just kind of cut that part out. So now ivory black, burnt umber, and a little bit of mineral spirits. We're going to start to draw a little bit. You kind of have to choose your approach carefully with alla prima. So now I'm thinning out the paint a little bit more and putting in just the most necessary dark shapes. And remember, I'm thinning out the paint with my mineral spirits, which is off camera just over here, so that the thinner paint can stick onto the thicker paint. A little bit more of the alizarin permanent. And I'm putting in these dark accents as a way to help me figure out the fine placement of the features. So see how I'm kind of just building one brush stroke at a time. Nothing more than that. Now for the eyebrows, I'll just leave them alone for now. I think what I'm going to do is put in this halftone here. Now I'm going to combine black and white, a little more mineral spirits, so black and white, a little bit of flesh tone, I'm going to start to put in the lights for the sclera. Making it a little lighter. And now we're going to put the bottom plane for the lower eyelid. It appears that the pupil itself is a little green. So I'm going to use the sap green and just let that mix with the colors that are already on the canvas there. And then, you know, I can probably use that kind of greenish color, combine it with these flesh tones. Start to put in the eyebrow, more or less just for indication purposes. So I'll be spending quite some time with the main triangle. As you're seeing here. Now clearly that highlight that you're seeing on the photograph is extremely bright, mainly because of the makeup. So I'm going to ignore it for now. I'm talking about the highlight that you're seeing here on the photo reference. So I tend to use larger brushes for coverage and then smaller brushes for control. So that's why I'm sticking with this one brush, just to have more control. And I think I'm going to do the same thing that I did with the blending of the large plane. So once I get in all of these features and show you how I go about beginning this rendering of form, I'm then going to use the use a cut scene so that I save you you know, all of the in-between slow stuff that you've seen in the other paint-alongs. This time I want to get a little further with this painting than the usual paint-alongs, so I'm going to have to utilize cuts. A little more light here. Now you're seeing how I'm starting to develop the shape for the nose. So the idea is breaking down each area into just a couple values, 4 or 5 different values, and then not necessarily adding more, but just finessing how those values fit within one another. So you can count them 1 for that, 2, 3, 4, 5 for the nose, and then the same kind of thing goes for the eye. Let's start off with this kind of coolish color. Add a little more ultramarine blue. This is the beauty of oil paint. You can control basically almost every aspect of it. I'm choosing to use a slower drying application of paint. Not using liquid or anything like that, just the mineral spirits. And that'll keep the paint open as long as possible, meaning keeping the paint wet. So now I'm just going to use the color value web. As you see here, I added a little bit of the alizarin permanent. Now we're starting to draw the shape for the lips. See how important those initial marks were? But at the same time, how they didn't have to be perfect. Now we can add more specificity onto those shapes. Now the next major area to cover is going to be the cheekbone. Again, I'm ignoring that highlight for now. It's tempting to put that highlight in there, but I'm going to hold off on that highlight. Now for the cheekbone, I'm going to switch brushes here. I don't know. Let's try this one. This brush might be, after so many years, this brush might finally be dead now. Oh, no, still can make a mark. So if the brush can still make a mark, I'll keep it. Especially during these times. You want to prioritize everything, all of your materials. I save all of my paints once I'm done with all of this. Just put my paints away in a container. Stick them in the freezer till I need to use them again. I don't really notice it affecting the quality of the paint. So while we have this, let's use it for what I intended to use it for, the cheekbone. So even the cheekbone is going to have a couple values, a couple value transitions. Though the difficulty with the cheekbone is it's much more subtle. So you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And now just kind of modulating all of those shapes, moving them around. That's what that means. So just moving those shapes around until they will work more harmoniously together. So the last area I'll work on before doing that little edit is the ear. So here's the shape for the tragus of the ear. Now we're going to go ahead and paint helix, anti-helix, just using the darks. A little bit more of the dark shape. So now we have a couple values for the ear, and now we'll go ahead and do that edit And now that we've done a little more rendering on the face, remember the same number of values, pretty much the same number of dominant values applies, 4 to 5 values per area, but I just took the time off camera to kind of blend them in together. Not necessarily blending in the sense of like getting a dry brush and trying to get all of the edges to be soft, rather, as you see there, just mixing in between all of the little areas. So now this should be a little bit more realistic than the usual paint along at this point, with the video time being much shorter, but still relatively long for your typical YouTube video. So now I'm going to go ahead and finish off the painting again with the bristle brush, just down towards the neck. I'm not going to render as much with the neck, but it still does call for some kind of explanation as to what's going on. That's the corner of the sternocleidomastoid. And again, I apologize I didn't show all of the footage. I did show as much as I possibly could without the video being terribly long. We're going to follow down here, and now we're going to mix an intermediate value. I do happen to really like the red contrasting with our model's flesh tones. I hope I won't forget that earring. So right after I put this value, I'm going to actually put in the earring. Sometimes when I'm focused on the structure and such in a painting, I completely miss things like an earring. So let me go ahead and do that now. Just a smaller brush, add a little bit of mineral spirits. So white and yellow ochre. I want the paint to be pretty thin, so about that will do. And that's how you can paint an earring with 2 brush strokes, more or less. I do want to put a little bit of an explanation for the shadow of the earring. I thought I could get away with that, but let's go ahead. The ivory black and the yellow ochre. There we go. A little explanation for the back of the earring. I don't want to spend too long on the jewelry. There we go. Just a few little brush strokes, and that should read at a distance. Now let's switch back to that larger brush. Scapula goes right into here. The flesh tones are a little bit lighter up here. Let's put a little more yellow ochre, mix it into these colors here. Yeah, when I taped the canvas onto the glass here, I kind of didn't leave enough room down here, so that's why this is kind of sticking out a little bit. But when it dries, this is 8 by 10 inch roughly, so I'll be able to just cut it, mount it onto a panel if I so choose. A little bit more light up here. And now I'm gonna get the shadow brush, and let's just mix the background color again. Cover all the way back here. And that should be about it for this demonstration. I know it was supposed to be a little bit longer, but I did some editing, so I did explain the the decisions that I made on the painting in between each cut. So you should be able to watch this video, pause it in between the cuts, and then as you're painting along, just catch up to where I was with each of the shapes. Remember, I put in 4 or 5 shapes in each area, and then between the cuts, then I kind of softened and made the areas a little bit more subtle. That being said, if you would like to see more painting videos such as this one, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you would like to support this channel even more, I have a Patreon account. Before I leave, I know I did my little outro already. Yeah, I'm all over the place. A little bit of burnt umber. Promise I won't do the outro twice. But I know that somebody would point this out if I didn't paint it. So thin paint, burnt umber, ivory black. This is going to be our encore. This is our encore. So a little curl here. Remember, thin paint tends to stick onto thicker paint. Let's make it a little darker. Painting in the hair, letting the paint mix onto the wet paint. So letting the paint mix as I apply the brush stroke. Yeah, I would have been pretty incomplete without that. Can't believe I almost forgot that. See, just like I said with the earring, I kind of tend to focus a little too much. So when you're painting this at home, make sure the paint is thin enough so that you're able to paint wet on wet and get these curls. Okay, that ought to do it for that. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.